0344 499 1000 if you want to join the conversation this morning. Matthew has said, I'd like to hear the clip for a fifth time for continuity. The Good Morning Britain clip between me and the doctor. Connor, how could you not have been listening? Connor Tomlinson, host at lotuseaters.com. How could you not have been listening?
Well, I'm very glad that you at least took them on, Chris, though, but I'm eager to hear you.
Oh, do you want to hear it one more time? It's only a minute long. It's not even that. It's only about 30 seconds. Go on, we'll hear it again. This is the last time we'll play it, but this is my confrontation with Dr. Patrick Hart from Just Stop Oil on Good Morning Britain.
The renewables that you claim would be the alternative to this, the technology isn't there yet to make them a viable alternative to oil, number one. Secondly, shame on you as a doctor, the fact that you decide that you are going to stop ambulances, which you have. Yes, and even though you're going to tell me that the ambulance service have said that there weren't delays, Chelsea Corby West, who was the daughter of one of the victims on the M20 crash in Dartford, said, and I quote, that her father, who was a victim, had to wait 40 minutes for an ambulance because of the disruption to the M20. You are a doctor and you are holding up ambulances.
Connor, was I abusive? Was that a personal attack?
You pointed out merely that he's violating the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm.
Yeah, and look, he seemed like a nice guy. I'm not trying to attack him in this conversation, but you know, that was a direct quote. And actually, since that conversation, the son of the guy whom I was referring to, actually Chelsea Corby West, was the daughter-in-law of the son, contacted me on Twitter and said, thank you, because everyone's reporting that what the ambulance service said, which of course was that there was no delays. You know, I've spoken to my dad. My dad was lying in the road. You know, he had to wait 40 minutes. The M20 was rammed. No one could get through. So it stands to reason there were delays. Thank you so much for pointing this out, because everyone is now assuming there were no delays.
Well, they're not the only one. I mean, there was a little while ago last year, Insulate Britain blocked an ambulance and someone was paralysed after an accident.
Oh, yeah, there was a stroke victim in that ambulance.
Exactly. So they've actually got blood in their hands at this point. Seriously.
And what they're also saying, all of these groups, is, well, we move out the way for ambulances, which is fine. Actually, in fairness, some of them do, but what they're not accounting for is that for the ambulance to get to the bit where they have to move it, they've got to get through the traffic. And and they say, well, we're not causing that much disruption. Well, if you're not, what's the point in doing what you're doing? That you're contradicting yourselves. So it is utterly repugnant, and it made me infuriated, because prior to that portion that you'd seen, both Susanna and Ed Balls, who were presenting, Ed Balls really went for him as well. Actually, I was quite impressed with Ed Balls for doing that. And he'd said, oh, no, you know, this is civil resistance, it's justified, and we have to do this, and all of this stuff. And I found myself genuinely getting riled up by it, because I just don't understand it. Like you say, he's a doctor.
Well, the accusation that, the government are just laying by while the entire world burns, how is that not the exact same ideology as the people sitting in the roads and saying, oh, well, it's just a bit of disruption, you know, it's way worse that we're all going to die. If a couple of people in the back of the ambulance get hurt, that's the exact same idea. That was
essentially what he was saying. I mean, he wasn't as blunt as that, but he was basically saying, look, if we're really sorry about it, it's terrible, but if someone dying in an ambulance, look at the number of people dying in the third world because of this. Look at the number of people that are dying. And that was actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because it was actually that bit that started to get me really angry. Well, so it's okay that this one gets hurt, but not this one. It didn't make any sense to me. But also, as I said, the alternative actually isn't ready yet. The battery storage isn't there yet.
I'm really glad you brought that up. I mean, so globally, renewables are only capable of generating 3% of our entire energy needs, and that's electricity needs, because that's 1/5 of all our energy needs globally, totally.
And we'll get there at some point.
No, we won't. We genuinely, we would genuinely not have a situation in the foreseeable future where renewables will eclipse fossil fuels, because they're not dispatchable. They're weather dependent. So you always need nuclear or gas or something like that.
What will mean that we will get there, though, will be when they are able to sort the battery storage out for that renewable energy.
Sure, but it won't be very foreseeable.
It can run a grid at a constant.
It will be very a long time.
We're probably at least 20 or 30 years away from that.
We are probably longer, to be honest.
So, some say longer. Some say that, or the other option as well, because I've looked into this so much, knowing I was talking to them. Or the other option is that we run smaller batteries at thousands of sites.
Or or carbon capture and storage. Then we don't have to eliminate any of our energy means. We can instead take the carbon off, like your catalytic converter on the back of your car, and repurpose the carbon for materials like fiberglass or carbon fiber on the outside of windmills.
That, to me, seems like the most viable alternative, because then what you say to people is, we're not going to interfere with your lives as much by
but that would be why they wouldn't want it, Cristo, because there is no mechanism for control there. There is no excuse to ration the energy if it is plentiful and it doesn't create pollution, is there?
I can't help but agree with you a little there, because the solution to all these problems, Sadiq Khan put out a tweet this week, which is never a fun experience, never a fun sentence.
That was your first mistake, was reading it.
Yeah. And it was like, our air is terrible, it's toxic, it's awful, we're all going to hell in a handcar. And I replied saying, I read all of this, and the only thing I think of is tax. Because I kind of feel like some of these people love it all because they go, brilliant. There we go, we can tax the hell out.
It's just another excuse to immiserate you. Have you seen Jeremy Hunt wants to road price electric cars now?
Oh, that was always inevitable.
Of course it was,
and that is why.
It's to replace fuel duty, yeah.
And also, it's because, which is why there is a deliberate decision to create as much congestion as possible by closing roads and making... I'm not against cycle lanes, but I'm against cycle lanes that are deliberately designed to narrow so much road space that you end up with a traffic jam.
And amendments to the highway code, which means that they and pedestrians get priority, which can inconvenience you off the road.
Did you... I was talking about this at the top of the show, right? The Met Police. Yesterday I saw this tweet. Do you know what they did this week? A really good work from the Met Police. They decided to catch cyclists that didn't have lights on at night. So good work, right? At last, trying to sort of enforce things.
What's the catch?
You know what they did to those cyclists who were riding illegally without lights?
They give them lights by any
They gave
chance?
them lights.
Of course they did. Okay. And who would have paid for said light? Oh, that's right. That's
us.
Yeah.
That's us. And they did it for 3 days running. In fact, let me because it's so funny. When did that happen? But
it's an open attempt to abolish private transport. I mean, I remember a little while ago, both you and Kevin spoke to various members of the cycling lobby when the highway code was changed. And the excuse they always gave, you spoke to the Cars Free Cities campaign woman that said, oh, we just want you to go around and you can just walk there instead. And then the other gentleman that spoke to Kevin O'Sullivan said, oh, it's for the economy and the environment. Whoa. There's the mask-off moment. It's nothing to do with common sense. It's nothing to do with the efficiency of transport. It's because you want to behaviourally nudge us into the more desirable behaviours.
It's called, the theory, and this is why it's so moronic, it's called induced demand. And the logic behind it is that if you have a road that's big enough, if you build more roads, or if you have traffic that flows freely, people say, oh, well, I'll drive to that destination because, the traffic's moving freely. Brilliant. As in, my life is easier, as in what the government should really be doing. And so they're trying to backtrack and do the opposite now, which is trying to make almost uninduced demand, meaning that the more congestion they create, the less likely you're going to say, oh, I'll drive there, I'll get in my car. But weirdly, even though they admit to that being the modelling, when you then say to them, well, you know that that's going to create more pollution, and you know that by having loads more congestion, you're making lives loads more difficult, and actually there's disabled people to consider, and there's some people that have to drive for whatever reasons, they then say, oh, no, we're not making things worse, and there is no traffic displacement, and nothing's well, if nothing's being made worse, why are you doing it? Because the whole point is to make it worse.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Have you seen in Oxford, Cambridge, Canterbury, where I used to live and grew up, which is only 2 miles across, mind you, they've created these designated Hunger Games-style district zones where you can't drive between them.
They want to stop you being able to drive from one half of the city to the other.
Do you want me to get super conspiratorial? Because I wrote a piece on this about how the lobbyists are having a war on motorists for Net Zero Watch, and I collated all of this. There was a Forbes article in 2030 that said about the abolition of private transport to meet the UN's 2030 climate goals.
Was that Colton Reid that wrote that?
No, it was Ida Alcon, the Danish Environment Minister. And she said, we'll have 100% either walking, cycling or public transport. And also we'll have flying cars, which seems like a nutcase pipe dream for Back to the Future. But there you go. She says, oh, you didn't need to own cars anymore. It was so convenient just to hire a bicycle or use public transport. You could get everywhere. The major concern is, and you see Ursula von der Leyen trotting out their European digital money, right? She said, you can do it from anything from renting a home to renting a bicycle, right? Note the word rent there. If you are contingent on the government for your income and your digital money, right? If you wanted to get anywhere, you have to rent either their bicycles or use their public transport, right? If you can't have your own private transport, it's another means of controlling you.
Well, it's difficult not to think that when there was the article as well from the what's the I forget it now. What's the organisation that everyone refers to? World Economic Forum.
Yes.
Where, you'll own nothing and be
That's
happy. Do you remember that? Oh, is that the one you're talking about?
Yes, they were cross-publishing force.
Basically, you don't need anything. You can rent everything, and you won't own anything privately, and you'll be absolutely thrilled. And wasn't there a thing in there as well that you'll need a saucepan. So
it'll be delivered by drone.
It'll be delivered by drone. You're making a casserole, but
you don't even make your own choices. That is actually. Have you seen the Saudi Arabian Line City by any chance?
Yeah, is that the one they're building?
That's what they're running it on. Did you know that you only get your food if you subscribe to a subscription service that delivers you vegetables to your pod every day? It's nightmarish.
Well, anyway, this cycle thing.
Yeah.
First day after the hour change, so this was a few days ago on October 31st. Great to see so many people still cycling despite the weather. All good. I bought a waterproof top this week so that I could still do a bit of cycling because I still cycle.
My boss cycles to work. I'm not going to rag on cycling as an activity.
Most wearing contrasting clothing and having lights on their bicycles. Good. Good that they're checking this. Then, weirdly, 30 sets of lights given to those with no lights to help them get home safely. So day one. Next day, then, November the 2nd, a few days later. So there's one being in between. But this was day 3 of Cycle Lights operation. Cycleways on Victoria Embankment, Southwark Bridge Road and Tooley Street. 64 sets of lights handed out and enforcement activity on a driver that pulled out in front of a cyclist.
Right.
The driver gets enforcement activity. The cyclists get given free lights and sent on their way. So I was just thinking, and I think this is a nice strategy. Next time a car needs its brakes doing or MOT doing, I'm just going to drive around London.
Yeah.
If I slam into someone, well, why didn't they fix my car for me?
Yep. Can we have a thing of where all of the viewers of this show just tweet links to the nearest Halfords every time the Met Police do this? Because clearly, if they're cycling to work in affluent areas of London, they can go there and spend the money on it themselves rather than my taxes going towards you and your stupid decision-making.
Well, you'll be pleased to know on November the 3rd, they only handed out 65 sets
brilliant.
of lights. So that's about 200 sets of lights that they've given to cyclists who are too stupid and selfish, rather than confiscating the bike or enforcing it with a ticket or saying to them, what the hell are you doing, you absolute idiots. When I ride in the evening, seriously, I've now got a little bag with me in my bike when I go on my bike all the time. And it's got all my lights in it, which I have to charge before I go because they're all on. I'm lit up like a Catherine wheel. I mean, I swear to God, there are lights on my person. I mean, I'm glowing in places you wouldn't even want to think about, Connor, I'll tell you now. Because, of course, I'm not an idiot.
Well, it's in your self-interest to not get killed, you would think.
Up the wall. It really does. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. We've got a couple of minutes before the break, Connor. Here's another question for you. And it's similar to this. So we have this really strange situation that we have to keep you safe, and if you're not lit properly, we'll give you your lights and all of that sort of thing. However, in the 6 weeks running up to November the 5th, you can go to a shop and you can buy mini explosives, which are available. I don't like banning things, but surely in our safety-obsessed society, the fact that you can buy fireworks privately is moronic.
It's moronic if you're going by the micromanagerial state of where the government has to hold your hand for everything. We're going to have a perfect society without any risk. But I don't like abiding by the Met Police standards where you've got to give them lights just because they can't do it themselves. I'm fine with fireworks being kept for sale. I'm not fine, for example, when they're bought and sold they're sold to teenagers who launch them at the Birmingham Police.
Well, that's why don't they just stop? Like, I'm not saying fireworks themselves should be banned, but why are you able to buy them privately when that is clearly massively abused? Like, have just organised displays so that when my dog is having literally an episode and a meltdown, which they have literally for the whole month of October, where they're set off in the daytime, in the evening, why can't we just have organised displays where we all know the time and date that they're going to happen? Do we need to buy them privately?
I think that would be a fairly reasonable proposition, but then my my instinct is to say that I dislike the government banning anything that is not an immediate, imminent threat of harm. And so you've got to be careful who you're selling it to. However, a little bit of noise, yeah, it's not nice for pets, of course. My sympathies go out, but I would sooner they be available to be sold than the government start taking them. Like they tried to ban disposable barbecues the other week. They actually tried to do a lobbying campaign for it.
See, that I agree was ridiculous, but I think that fireworks, they do have an inherent harm on other people's right to have a quiet life. We'll debate this more in the next hour. We'll also talk about the Manchester report, which will, I think, infuriate you, and more from the newspapers. All here live from the Talk Radio studio. It's Talk TV. Morning. How are you? It's Cristo here on Talk TV with you for the next hour. How are you? Thanks so much for your company. This morning we'll take a look inside some of the newspapers. We'll do some of the front pages between now and 7 o'clock. Connor Tomlinson, lotuseaters.com, host there, is with us this morning. We're looking through some of the newspapers, getting some of your calls on handing out lights to cyclists. We've been getting your calls on as well. What was the other one? Oh, Just Up Oil as well, and my confrontation with them this morning. Tracy says, I totally disapprove of fireworks as well. They should be one day and one day only. My dogs were terrified last night. I agree, Tracy, it's really difficult to plan your life. I can't go out when my dogs are going absolutely crazy. But if I knew, I wouldn't even mind if there were 5 displays in the whole of run up to November the 5th. I wouldn't care, because at least I'd be able to say, right, I know it's at that point, or I know when I go to the park. I can't even take my dogs to the park at the moment because people set off bangers and they want to run off. So it's an absolute nightmare. It scares them half witless, and I just don't see why we need them privately. But I know you disagree. But Harry, Cristo, you can be lit up like a Christmas tree. This is on your bike, and drivers will still pull out on you. I'm sure you'll experience this if you keep cycling, says Harry in Sutton. Well, Harry, I've got 2 things to say to that. Firstly, I cycle at least twice a week to a couple of appointments I've got. Yeah, cars pull out on me. That's because it's London, and cars pull out in order to try and get into the flow of traffic. That happens when you are a car driver, happens when you're a cyclist. It's a bit frustrating, I understand, but as long as they don't do it in a dangerous way, I anticipate when I see a car pulling to the give way, I anticipate that might happen, because in London that happens, number one, and I don't let it ruin my day. I just anticipate it. But number 2, if it happens when I've got lights on, are you suggesting that not having lights on would make that any better? Are you suggesting that would be a better solution? At least when I've got lights on and someone pulls out on me in a dangerous way, I can roll my eyes and say, well, what an idiot. They could see me and they knew I was there.
It's entirely their fault. You're never going to circumvent human stupidity.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what we're trying to do.
Well, you're never going to get rid of it wholesale. All you can do is work to do your best to mediate its effects on you.
Totally, and also realise that this is just one of the crosses you have to bear when you are driving in a city. Sometimes a driver won't see me in a different situation. Maybe they'll cut across me, but I ride in a way that anticipates that happening because I am a car driver, and I think that's the key to it, actually. That because I've been a car driver in London for so long, I kind of know what's going to happen. I know where the pinch points are. I'm not just like Brenda giving it a go for the first time after having never driven a car, deciding I'm going to go out on a bike, and or a drunk person on a Boris bike thinking, oh yeah, it'll be fun to get home, because of course that's always going to lead to trouble, always. Morning, Cristo, says Ryan. I didn't know you had joined the fun police. They're already restricted for sale to children. Well, that doesn't work. So why do you want to take the choice out of adults away because a few don't like the sound? Not all dogs are scared of fireworks. I've had 2 and neither have been bothered, says Ryan. Well, again, okay, maybe a compromise is that we only sell them for the week up to November the 5th. At least it's only 1 week of it. But I'm sorry, it starts on October the 1st. That is ridiculous. We don't need them for sort of 2 months. All right. Got to talk about another story this morning. And I was glad it was you this morning, Connor, actually, because I think you're going to get as infuriated by this as I am. Because when you were last on, we spoke a lot about how obsessed we are with safety.
Yes.
and we've spoken a bit this morning about the role of the police, who I think overall have got a pretty terrible job to do, and frontline officers actually. No, I mean, I wouldn't want to be a police officer.
I've had reasons to be quite contemptuous of the police actually recently, because I went to Conservative Party conference and a public order officer accosted me outside because we were filming for our website an altercation between a biblical preacher and a local journalist. She turned to me and she said, "Oh, what do you think about this?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know. What's he saying? I've just turned up." And she said, "Oh, he's saying the LGBTQ plus community are unnatural," right? And I said, "Well, hang on a minute. First of all, I'd just spoken to the LGB Alliance folks and interviewed them, for example. I said, oh, there's a group in there that think LGB and the TQ plus are very separate. The LGB is to do with sexuality, the TQ plus is to do with gender. So I think you have to, if you're going to have a debate about it, separate those two things. The Q plus section might be insidious because of an activist called Gail Rubin in the 1980s who created queer theory, who wanted to normalise paedophilia.
Yes,
that is not controversial.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Before I'd even finished my sentence, the police officer walks over to me and goes, "Right, if you keep having this conversation, I will arrest you under the Public Order Act because you just described her sexuality as insidious." And I went, "I wasn't talking about her. I've not insulted her. I said this specific activist was
about
insidious."
gender.
Exactly. And he said to her, "Did you feel insulted, ma'am?" And she said, he doesn't know who I am." And then the officer immediately started backing away and said, "Right, you don't get to question me. I'm not answering your questions. I've made myself very clear, haven't I?" And I went, "No, you haven't. I need to ask what you went. I'm not talking to you anymore. Made myself very clear." There were multiple officers standing around me, ready to do the altercation stance. There's a police officer with a shoulder-mounted camera, not even a body cam, filming me the entire time. So we've actually submitted via Faircop a complaint about this, but no transparency whatsoever. And he was an inspector from Kent Police drafted.
Well, this is what I was going to actually, it ties into the point, because this report about the Manchester bombings, it actually talks about, and the guy, I think John Saunders, who authored the report, and it's the big official report as to the emergency services response to the Manchester Arena bombings back in 2017, the attack that killed 22 people, and they make a real distinction between the inspectors and the management in police, and actually the frontline officers that kind of don't know, have got to try and navigate this idea of common sense versus what management tell them that they have to do. And it sounds like perhaps that's an example, because an inspector doing that is obviously ridiculous. You're having a conversation and it doesn't sound like you were being insulting at all.
We shook hands after, me and the woman. She said, "Yeah, that's quite surprising, actually." She was very left-wing, so...
So the report that was released a couple of days ago by Sir John Saunders found a litany of emergency services failings in response to the attack. 22 people died. The youngest victim was a girl aged about 6 years old called Safi Roussos. There was another victim called John Atkinson. Sorry, Safi Roussos was 8 years old. John Atkinson was another victim. And it was found in this report that there was a likelihood, in the case of John Atkinson, a very, very high likelihood, that they could have survived. But unfortunately, there were a litany of errors by the emergency services regarding declaring it a major incident and not passing that on to the other agencies. But most importantly, and this is the most staggering part of this, they had to do risk assessment procedures, which meant that the fire service decided that, and this was the bosses of the fire service, because apparently the people on the front line, the fire officers and the people were absolutely tearing their hair out, they decided to base their operations 3 miles away from the arena because they didn't want to be too close because of a full assessment that needed to be taken. So you have this bizarre scenario where ambulances were rushing towards the scene, but the fire engines were driving in the opposite direction with their blue lights on to congregate 3 miles away whilst they assessed the risk. The paramedics then arrived, people were inside the arena and they could hear the paramedics outside, and no one went in because, again, the paramedics were instructed that it was too dangerous. All the time that this was happening, there were bystanders, onlookers, all of those sorts of people trying to just use whatever they could to keep people alive. And eventually the fire brigade went in 2 hours and 7 minutes after the bomb went off. And the 8-year-old girl, Safi Roussos, her parents thought she'd been killed instantly. She wasn't. She was alive for an hour, 8 years of age. Now, she had, in fairness to the report, they said that she had horrific injuries. It would be the equivalent of being sort of shot 15 times. But had they got her to hospital, there may have been a chance of her surviving. She even asked, "Am I going to die?" And she was 8. And it's just staggering to me that, fine, you assess, you take a few minutes to do that, but not entering for 2 hours and 7 minutes after the bomb went off. Some of them didn't get there until that time. It's unbelievable to me.
It's a symptom of the social planning attitude we were talking about before the break. When people, mainly bureaucrats in offices far away from the front lines, start looking at graphs, they start looking at numbers on a spreadsheet, they start moving things around to maximise the number without realising the on-the-ground implications. Strange analogy, actually. We were looking this week at currently the US Supreme Court is arguing against affirmative action policies. And one of the people arguing in favour is a lawyer with no military service. And she says we need quotas by skin colour and ethnicity in the military because it creates a more diverse fighting force. Well, that has no bearing on how cohesive the unit is on the front line, how effective they are.
How good the people are.
Exactly. So it's people in Washington in the US. Over here, it's people mainly in Whitehall, or like the College of Policing, for example, that are setting forth these ideological diktats, that are moving places around, that are doing these ridiculous risk assessments, that are sending you on health and safety courses all the time, but a lot of the time it's just common sense. They're wasting your time and money. Meanwhile, because they're creating these distractions to give themselves a job, it's actually harming people when emergency scenarios kick in.
It's honestly the most. If I read that, I mean, it's too long for me to read. I'll read a few of them. 12 key failures, a lack of communication between the emergency responders, a failure to have a multi-agency control room so they could all talk to each other and tell each other when it was supposed to be safe. Greater Manchester Police, Dale Sexton, their force duty officer, didn't inform other emergency services of the declaration of what's called Operation Plato, which would have had them all, because they'd rehearsed that, knowing what was going on, but had forgotten to tell the other ones. Also, the force duty officer failed to zone the scene so that they could say, right, this bit's safe, so go in there now. No forward command post. Delays in getting ambulances and paramedics to the scene. Delays in getting the hazardous area response team to the scene. Failure to send non-specialist paramedics into the city room. City room was the room where most of it happened, where the blast went off, to assist with triage. No stretchers in there. People were being... What the guy, John Atkinson, who was alive for 90 minutes before he went to hospital and died, was dragged out on a piece of board that they'd found. I mean, it's kind of like it's sort of third world stuff. Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue did not arrive on scene and make any contribution in removing the injured. The Fire and Rescue Service didn't make a contribution in removing the injured. And no one took a grip of the situation. No one passed on important information. It's just an absolute
unmitigated disaster. Yep.
Yeah. After, so the bomb went off at 10, I think 10:15, 10:30, something like that. Just after midnight, there were still 36 casualties waiting to go to hospital. The last casualty left at 10 to 3.
The enraging thing about this as well is it's bookended by the fact that it didn't need to happen. It was conducted by a man who should not have been here. It was conducted because the police were, again, going back to the bureaucracy, too afraid of being seen as profiling, as racist, to consult the man, check his bag.
Yeah, remember there was the security guards who spoke in the inquiry saying, well, we didn't want... we thought he was acting suspiciously. And it's actually... You know, like apparently, and again, this is not a reflection on the frontline officers, because apparently they were absolutely climbing the walls. The paramedics, the fire people say, why can't we go in? And everyone say, no, we've got to risk assess it. And it's the same. Those sort of troops on the ground, those security guards, have been so scared to be able to go and challenge anyone that they just didn't.
Yeah, they've been hamstrung. And then Mayor Andy Burnham has the gall to say, oh, don't look back in anger. Don't look back in anger? You for real?
Yeah.
How the hell are we meant to prevent this sort of stuff happening in the future if we don't get angry about it. Because anger is our antibody reaction to injustice. It's the immune system for our soul. If we don't express outrage at the failings that led up to this, the failings to deal with it, how the hell are we going to have any change, preventative and responsive, in the future to save more lives and to stop more lives from being taken?
Well, what is your response to this? Because I just can't believe that health and safety was the thing that actually stopped people being saved in a terror attack. I mean, that is just unbelievable to me. 0344 499 1000. We'll talk about this a little bit more when we come back, and a few more of the stories from the newspapers, all here live from the Talk Radio studio. This is Talk TV. Morning, how are you? It's Cristo here on Talk TV. Thanks so much for your company. And apparently we've tagged the wrong you in the Twitter feed. Sorry about that. Yes. Oh, now Tom's having a very off day today. He screwed up the sound, and now it's some poor person who is... I mean... Like, I'm sorry, but Connor Tomlinson is not an Oriental-looking woman who eats pastries. You know, he may be many things, but he's not that.
You're denying my trans identity.
Oh, yeah, actually, probably. Maybe that's how you do it. Well, you know, Rachel Dolezal.
Dolezal,
that's
yes.
it, who identifies as... Well, did you see the one this week? Oh, my word. I've got to find it, because I sent it to my partner, and then we'll go back to the awful stuff at the Manchester Arena. But I sent it to my partner. He made me send it to him. The Norwegian man, right?
I have not heard of this one.
Right. A man in Norway. I don't know whether this is a spoof. A man in Norway is sparking outrage on social media after he was sympathetically interviewed about an identity he has on Norwegian television.
Right.
This is Jorand Almey.
Bless you.
Who is an able-bodied male who now identifies as a disabled woman.
Female. I have heard this, yeah.
Almey stated that he had always wished he had been born a woman who was paralysed from the waist down, so therefore now uses a wheelchair the whole time, even though they're fully able-bodied.
Logically speaking, what do gender ideologues have against this? Because if you can cut off one appendage and be someone else, what's stopping you from disabling the use of the others?
Yeah, but see...
I don't agree with any of it. But when you start those dominoes falling, it doesn't make sense.
I disagree with you. I don't think you can say you don't... How can you not agree with it? What do you mean when you say you don't agree with it?
You can't change.
Give two hoots if someone wants to.
You can't change a biological sex by thought, and I don't think it helps. So we're actually interviewing Richie Herron down the line later, the gentleman who spoke to Times Radio a little while ago about his detransitioning surgery, and he said, actually, I had severe OCD and childhood trauma that was misdiagnosed as gender dysphoria, and they conducted the operation on him. They drilled a hole in his pelvis. They left him for 5 days to bleed out. The reason they did that is because they gave him the wrong dose of what's the drug they give you to put you out?
The anaesthetic.
Anaesthetic, yeah, because women and men take different doses of anaesthetic. But because he'd identified as female, they gave him the female dose. So he was hemorrhaging blood without a blood transfusion. He is now incontinent. He says, I don't say the word trans regret, I say the word trans grief, because it's the person I now cannot go back to being. But
that's medical malpractice.
That is very, very common. They have the highest rate of complications, the highest rate of resurgeries. It is barbaric. It doesn't help trans people. It doesn't.
Hang on. I've no problem with a person as an adult who wants to have that surgery knowing the risks and live as a different sex to the one that they were born as. I understand that biologically there are going to be things that will never change. I completely get that, and I completely understand and respect that there is a legitimate conversation to be had about the clashing of rights and women feeling like their rights have been eroded by that, which I think is a very toxic conversation, and I think that conversation needs to be had with respect to both sides. But if you're asking me, do I have a problem with someone deciding that they want to have reassignment surgery, knowing the risks and doing so as an adult, that's nothing to do with the state. That is nothing to do with anyone else.
I don't think they're capable of consenting to it if they are in a a position of severe distress. And I think a lot of the time the medical institutions overlook it, a lot of the time because it's very profitable. I mean, you saw lots of places in America especially come out and say the reason we started trans-identifying surgery is because after Obamacare we could sell it to these individual gender practices and say you will get a lifetime treatment patient for the hormones, the repeated surgeries, for the repeated consultations.
But that again is an argument for people having had the correct psychological analysis to do that, because the same number of people that you will say are going into this surgery because of psychological problems, they would also argue that if they didn't have the surgery because they are so unhappy with their identity. And again, I don't say this thinking that women shouldn't be listened to. I don't say this thinking that there isn't a conversation to be had about when is appropriate for a child.
Oh, no.
Absolutely think that there is a value. But if you are an adult, you've had a psychological assessment, because what you're describing is very against, actually, the ideological framework of the freedom of a person to...
Absolutely not. No.
Yes, it is.
No.
What's it got to do with the state?
Because I'm not necessarily saying the state. I'm saying that, well, partially, because I don't think that... I think it violates Hippocratic Oath, and so I don't think that's fair. Well, let's put it this way. In the same way, I don't think that doctors should be allowed to prescribe anorexics diet pills. I don't think people with gender dysphoria, which, when you say they have to have proper psychological profiling, they remove gender dysphoria and gender identity disorder from the DSM-5.
Oh, and I don't agree with that. Because there's a line between what is considered to be conversion therapy and what is considered to be proper and fair psychological analysis.
But they now say that conversion therapy is not affirming the gender identity of the person when they want to switch it. So they've played an Orwellian language game when a lot of the time, for example, and this is what the LGBT Alliance object to, a lot of young gay kids are pushed down the line, occasionally by homophobic parents or because they're just confused about their sexuality, and said, oh, if you're a boy that likes boys, it must be because you're really a girl.
And again, that is a fair conversation to be had. But there are also, and it should be acknowledged, thousands, maybe even millions of people that have had gender reassignment surgery who now live really happy lives as a result of doing that. You cannot possibly say that there aren't people that have done that, and we should also remember that too.
It's about a 50-50 split, because the suicidality and the mental health reporting rates are still about half even after post-surgery, and that's self-reported among people that say, I've had the surgeries and I am affirmed by my friends and family.
What would be your solution then? So if someone has gender dysphoria,
yes,
and again, respecting what you've said, which I happen to agree with, that you can be gender non-conforming as a child, you can be sort of, blur the gender lines without it needing to be medicalised.
You can be a flamboyant man. Welcome to the 80s.
Yeah, exactly. I've got most of my work off the back of that. But what would be the solution in your mind if people weren't able to do that and they had that genuine gender dysphoria and genuinely wanted to no longer be present as the sex that they were born?
Do not lie to them and say that you can change your sex by thought, because that's not true, because you're setting up an impossible goal for someone to pursue. Like, even if you do all the surgeries, even if you present every day in your life, you're still going to look in the mirror and know in your heart of hearts that you haven't made the leap to the position you want to be. And that's where...
Who cares if they're happy by having done it?
But lots of people aren't.
But I'm talking about the ones that are. I respect what you're saying about the ones that aren't, but what about the ones, the thousands, the millions that are?
Because the problem is, if it's half and half that aren't, then do you really want to inflict this irreversible surgery on someone? The solution
is to give more preparation, which I agree with you on, to those that potentially would be unhappy. But you can't... I don't agree with saying to everyone, well, you just can't have it.
Knowing what that surgery is, I think it's too barbaric. Frankly, I will say that. And also, it is untrue to say you can change your sex by thought. If you are in a position where you're a man, for example, and you feel more feminine and believe that you would be happier transitioning to the woman, why do we give you hormones that are against your biology, which can cause you osteoporosis, cancer? Why do we not give you testosterone replacement therapy instead, which we get to 50-year-old men, to see instead, first, perhaps testosterone deficiency might be behind it, you might feel more comfortable in your own body, and that will do less harm than if we put you in estrogen.
Well, firstly, who's to say that hasn't been...
It doesn't happen. It actually doesn't happen.
But secondly, maybe they don't want that because they don't want to be anything other than becoming a different... And I agree, by the way, the biology within you, your skeleton, there are certain things that will never change. I also agree there is a fair debate to be had about women's sports. There's a fair debate to be had about the language, where you have sort of women's sexual health or women's gynecological clinics where they're getting rid of the word woman, and women have fought for that all their lives. And I absolutely believe that. However... I will stick to it. If you are an adult, you have wanted to do this, you have considered it in a fair and rational way, and you have had the help that you require to get there. I have no problem with someone going through that surgery.
I don't think it's possible to consider it in a fair and rational way if it's founded on an irrational premise, which is essentially I have the soul of a woman trapped in a man's body. That's not a rational premise. That is an emotional premise. I have a lot of sympathy for people that struggle with that, because you're also never going to get there, and that's really actually tragic.
But who cares if they're happy living as close to it as they are? Who cares?
Lots of people aren't. And I think you can see that lots of people aren't, not only in the suicide rates, but the fact that a lot of these protesters, a lot of these activist movements are driven by animosity, not just towards women, but towards people who tell them, oh, I'm sorry, I'm sympathetic to your plight, but... You can't change your sex. And the outrage and the violence that's directed towards people like that, I do think there's a lot of bottled up internal aggression.
I think it's about intent when you say that. I mean, if you are to say that, look, biologically, deep down, when it comes to your skeleton, when it comes to certain parts of your chromosomes, when it comes to all of those sorts of things, when it comes to your height, when it comes to your lung capacity, when it comes to all of that, you're right. You those ingrained sex traits do not change. What you are doing is you are changing your outward appearance to match as close as possible the gender identity that you have. And I don't believe people sort of wake up one morning and decide it. I believe that there are people who have a genuine gender dysphoria, a genuine issue with their gender identity, to the point where the only thing that would make them happy, many of them having lived in the sex they were assigned at birth for years and been desperately unhappy.
Sorry, sex assigned at birth, even you're using the language there. It is their sex. It's not that just they arbitrarily assigned it. It's factual.
Yes, I know, but for the purposes of this conversation...
But they can't change the sex. You can only change the gender.
Yeah, you're changing your outward appearance to match the gender identity that you have.
So you can't change from the sex assigned at birth. It'll always be your sex. It's not just assigned. Do you see what I mean?
Yes,
the fundamental premise.
For the purposes of this conversation, I get frustrated with people who drill down on the language in these conversations, because it's language that's needed in order to know who I'm talking about.
Yep.
Like, for instance, I would describe you as a man.
Yeah.
Loosely. Now, I would describe you as a man.
You wound me, sir.
But in this conversation, if we were talking about gender reassignment, I would call you a cis man, not because...
That's redundant.
No, but it's just so...
It's entirely redundant.
Just to clarify, or I would say someone born as a man at birth who wants to change their identity. It's just an easier way of saying. If I was talking about you day to day, I would never describe you as a cis man. I'd never describe myself as a cis man. But in a conversation where you're talking about gender and sex assignment surgery, it's just easier to use that language.
So we're not going to agree on the surgery thing, but drilling back to the original premise, if you can change your gender and you can approximate it as close as possible to the point of where you will say, I will call you a woman, what's the difference between that and bleaching your skin or having a surgical procedure which paralyses you from the waist down? Are you not genuinely the other race or disabled?
Well, yes, but I don't think that there is... I mean, it's a fair point, but I don't think that there is a history of... disability dysphoria. I mean, this is one example that we've come up with, which is ridiculous.
There is actually in the DSM-5 in the same thing that the gender identity disorder is.
But
it's like the reverse of phantom limb syndrome. People actually do it.
Well, yeah, I know. And there's someone who I've read a book once from Dr. Raj Prasad. I don't know if you know him, about someone who was convinced that their hand was out to get them and wanted to chop it off. That was completely ridiculous.
But what is the difference between that and thinking my male appendages?
You could say your penis, it's fine. We're talking about it in an adult conversation.
A bit more early for this. What is the difference between saying that and my male parts are not a part of me, it feels alien to me, I'm a woman? There isn't. But I think basically you're struggling with it because you want to be sympathetic to that group.
Yes, and I don't care. I mean, I genuinely don't care. I mean, that's the problem. I care if it's being done in an abusive way that is not responsible. That I care about, and I care when it's done to vulnerable people in society who are under the age of 18, and there's a conversation to be had there. And I care about women who are worried about their rights being eroded. There's where I care. But if you are someone that is over 18 and it is a rational decision that you have gone through and you want to do it and it makes you happy, I don't care.
See, I think...
Would you refer to someone who had done it as their preferred...
No.
So if I had had a sex change and I was sat here...
I'll use your name.
You'd use my name, but would you say him?
Well, in your personhood, why would I use your pronouns in front of you? Because also we're using to refer to someone when they're not around. I don't know. You might say, Tom might come in, my producer, and might say, I'll get you a glass of water, and you might say, well, she wanted one, or he wanted one. Oh, right,
so there are occasions where you might do that.
No.
So you call me he.
It's not true.
I know it's not true, and I get that.
Sorry, but that is where... And I don't think lying to people helps them.
Well, yeah, but it's also just not kind. I mean, I might want you...
I don't think lying to people is kind. Sorry,
I might not want you to refer to me as fat, but...
I might want you to refer to me as handsome and smart, but you're not going to do it.
Well, I might do, but I wouldn't call you... wouldn't call you ugly to your face.
See, if I thought you looked bad, I would tell you, I wouldn't wear that jacket, mate, because I think that would be an improvement on your life out into the future. You might be blunt in the present. You might tell someone what they don't want to hear, but it might help them out into the future.
Anyway, we've gone down a road that
it's important.
I know it's an interesting conversation, and in fairness, these are the sorts of conversations that need to be had in a rational way, because there is too much toxicity in these arguments.
These
conversations
are not had when they're screaming across the picket lines.
Yeah, and actually, in fairness, from both sides. I'm sorry to say, both sides are toxic in this conversation.
I hesitate to say so, especially considering the I don't like the term TERF because I don't like the term feminist, but they've gone over and had this tour of Portland saying let women speak, and it's been shut down by trans activists saying we're going to throw bricks and pies at you. So I think that's slightly different.
Yeah, absolutely. But there are also... Anyway, look, we're getting...
of course,
I'm sorry, I do believe that there are people on both sides that don't have great intent. And if we don't have a conversation in the middle, it's never going to get solved. And it's got to get solved. Anyway, let's do some of the tweets and stuff on this. The response to the arena tragedy, which people are just sort of catching up on now, sums up the way this country is run. Someone else saying, what the hell are you two talking about? Get on with the show. Thank you. Another one here. Why hasn't Andy Burnham resigned? If he was a Conservative, the mainstream media would be going ballistic. This is, if you're just joining us, by the way, talking about the report that came out this week, which was the response to the Manchester Arena bombing in 2017, where obviously there are questions. The third part of the report is about the why the bomber, who I won't name, was not picked up by security services, how he ended up here, all of these sorts of things, which is a valid conversation. But we're talking about the parts of the report that absolutely annihilate the emergency services for taking so long to enter the arena and taking so long to do health and safety assessments, for which they have now apologised unreservedly, and the absolutely heartbreaking evidence that showed that some of the youngest victims, one 8 years old, was alive and potentially could have been saved had medical attention been given to them quickly enough, professional medical attention, rather than bystanders and witnesses and people who were just on hand trying to do anything they could to help, which is absolutely horrific. Another one here, if I remember rightly, hang on, I've just lost that tweet. If I remember rightly, didn't the same thing happen at Grenfell, where emergency services stood by for a certain period of time before entering the scene? I remember videos online at the time of people asking them why they weren't going in. See, do you know, this is what annoys me as well about this, is that actually it just sort of picks up with the conversation we were just having. We seem to have a system, whether it be the police or a system of government, where we are obsessed with your safety. We're obsessed with removing risk from your life. We're obsessed with nannying you to the point with signs and signals and everything that sort of, stop you being able to live your life because we're so scared that we've got to keep you safe for yourself.
Or the tube announcements, for example.
All the tube announcements constantly and all of these sorts of things. Or, caution, this vehicle is reversing. The noise pollution that I get from that every time I hear it. Yet when there is an actual real danger and we really need you to go, okay, we're going to try and keep you safe, they say, oh no. no, we're not doing that. And I've no real problem, again, with the police. If they want to paint a police car rainbow colours, they can. Hang on, let me finish.
You shouldn't be getting political.
Hang on. They want to do a police car in rainbow colours. I don't give two hoots if they want to do that. The only time it becomes a problem to me, right, and when I do have a problem with it, is that it's just a virtue signal, because when the gay community, when we really needed you, when it came to the Stephen Port murders of the gay men who were killed and murdered and given GHB, the date rape drug, and overdosed and killed, and the police rolled their eyes, well, gays, they're all partying. And it's just this sort of, this fannying around the edges of, oh, well, you know, we'll look after you this way, or we'll tell you that we're on your side this way. But when we really need you, you're not there.
It's the same with, I don't know if you've seen that dreadful Jeffrey Dahmer thing on Netflix, where they try
I haven't watched it yet.
Right, so the entire thing is just propaganda and loads of it's made up, to the point of where the actual protagonist of it didn't exist. She's an amalgam character. And the entire thing is meant to paint the police as racist, to the point of where they ignore one of Dahmer's victims was a 14-year-old Laotian boy who was found outside on his apartment doorstep with blood coming from his ear because Dahmer had tried to inject acid into his brain. And Dahmer said, oh, this is my young boyfriend, he's 19, I'll take him back up to the apartment. The police came up to the apartment, he said, here's some photos of us together from before, he's just had too much to drink and passed out. And the show portrayed them as being racist, sexist, homophobic. They were doing prank calls to the Laotian family, they'd been dismissed from the police and they got admitted back in and got given an award. None of that's true, right? What actually happened is the police had been dismissed and they had to sue the state because they came back and said, we were told to have some sensitivity around the gay community and we didn't want to over-police the black community, therefore we didn't want to intervene.
We didn't interfere.
Exactly. So it was the permissiveness by the higher-ups wanting to be seen as culturally sensitive that allowed predators like this to operate in these communities. So we need to be less afraid of being seen as racist, sexist, homophobic and profile people that look suspicious at Manchester Arena, or actually try and intervene and do a little bit more digging when Jeffrey Dahmer operating in these communities.
I agree with that. I absolutely agree with that, because actually the only reason, and I think you're going to disagree with me, but the only reason I think that people get so annoyed by the rainbow cars or the police having, I don't know, a Black Lives Matter flag on their car, or...
Well, they're communists, so that's slightly different.
But the only reason that people get annoyed is because there are so many flaws in the service.
Yeah,
do you see what I mean? Because that's
sure.
You say,
they're picking and playing favourites ideologically, but yeah.
Why are you worrying about this over here and painting your car when I just want you to come to my house when I've been burgled?
Well, that's the joke. I was about to say the only way to actually get your burglary solved is if you put rainbow stickers on all your possessions and say it's a hate crime.
Well, do you know what? That's why I was just thinking today about the last night, actually, when I was reading up about this awful Manchester report. I thought, well, you know, they should have all said that they were protesters. They should have screamed from inside the arena, all the poor injured people, we're protesters, and then the police would have rushed in.
Do you remember
and made sure that they were all had blankets and that they were all being looked after.
Do you remember that police crime and protesting bill that everyone was talking about, including me, saying, oh, it's objectionable to say that noisy protests should be cancelled, it's free speech, it's cracking down. Do you remember when we were going to live under a totalitarian society that stopped protests? Oh, that's right, it was only used against anti-lockdown protesters. Meanwhile, the police actually allow you to sit in roads and block ambulances, and when you walk into the road and you film it, Cristo, they start having a go at you. We're in a broken country, and that is why people are angry. That is why people get annoyed when police show up to Pride and they dance in high heels and take photos with men in leather dog costumes. It's because you are wasting time when actual crimes are going on.
But I don't think you'd care so much about that. Would you just demonstrated it? If the crimes were being solved, if we had a perfect police force...
I still think you shouldn't be posing with men in dog costumes in high heels because you're on the job.
Okay, fair enough. But if we had a perfect police force and everything was being done well, and there weren't these examples about Manchester Arena, and there weren't these examples of burglaries not being solved, I think the public would say, oh, well, we actually don't care. If you want to do that, we don't care so much, because you've got time to solve this problem over here because you're perfect over here. Whereas I think that's what the issue is.
I think the ideologies are the root, so I think it's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario, and I also think the police shouldn't be playing
the only reason
anyway.
the only reason it's become political is because of the trans debate. The gay flag never used to be seen, I don't think, as a political thing to support. I think where it becomes political is that people are...
They've involuntarily conscripted the gay community into their political movement.
I think that because now the whole flag is associated with the controversies around trans people,
and it keeps broadening out to give more and more and more and more groups as well.
Yeah, and whereas I don't think it used to be like that. I really don't think it used to be like that, because I don't think anyone says that you're not born gay and that you just deserve equality. I don't think anyone really says that anymore, because that, being born gay and getting equality, doesn't infringe on anyone else's rights. Where the political side comes in is when now you have a community, whether you agree with it or not, whether the debate is good or bad, that there is a perception that it infringes on other people's rights, and that's why it's become political, the flag, because it's all together.
Especially because you have pressure groups like Stonewall coming in and, again, taking the broadening, marginalised communities out, making them the new sacred cows, and moving beyond legal equality, equal protection under the law, to say you can't just hit someone for their sexuality, we shouldn't criminalise same-sex attraction, to saying, OK, we now need affirmative rights. You have a right to changing rooms. You have a right to compelled speech, to say that you have your pronouns and identity.
And I think there's a fair debate to be had there. Without a doubt, there's a fair debate to be had there, and that's when it becomes political, and that's when the flag then gets associated with that. And I can understand the gay people that say, well, hang on, our flag used to mean just exactly what it was, the equality that no one objects to.
I will say, though...
Well, you can say that when we come back, because we're hideously late for the break. We've got loads of texts and tweets on this, and especially about Manchester as well, all live from the Talk Radio studio. This is Talk TV. Morning, how are you? It's Cristo here on Talk TV, still joined in the studio by Connor Tomlinson from HelloToEaters.com. Cristo, you are mangling the English language. This is on the trans debate.
Right.
I do not want to discuss anything with people who want to change the meaning of words. It's like Alice in Wonderland. Yeah, I mean, I get where you're coming from, but also what I would throw into that, and I know that you disagree, is kindness. And if it makes someone happier and it's no skin off my nose, then I'm not bothered about using... I mean, do I love the idea that, you know, oh my God, I've got to write my pronouns on every single thing, and they're being announced to me, or it being on a badge in a shop? No, I think that's ridiculous. And I think that we're all adults enough that if I were to use a pronoun that someone doesn't like, they can say to me, would you mind using the other one? And I'll say, I'll try and remember to, but also don't, you know, scream at me if I forget. I've no issue with that. I think that goes too far. But no, I would just be kind about it.
Is it true?
Doesn't matter whether it's true biologically. I don't care whether it's true biologically.
It doesn't matter whether the climate's going to destroy the world or not. I'd quite like them to sit in the road. I believe
in gender identity being different to assigned sex at birth. And I know you don't even like the word assigned sex at birth, but take that out.
Well, gender identity is also a silly term. It was created by Judith Butler and Simone de Beauvoir, and both of those were literal Marxists who wanted to destroy the family. So excuse me if I don't trust their motivation to do so. And also,
I think it's not happening.
I think it's best for people to live in accordance with their biological sex, because you get the least amount of conflict that way. You will have a little bit of room between that. For example, like, I mean, Boy George.
But what if someone's really upset? What if it really... Oh, look, we're going down the road again in the conversation. But there's that. Okay, enjoying the chat between Cristo and Connor. Much learning comes from quality debating and interviews like this. Kudos to you both. Well, we've got to have these conversations. And there are people, and I'll say, I'll read you just one of them. Shannara saying, you're peddling misinformation around trans people. He's one of the most transphobic guests you've ever had on. He's talking absolute nonsense. I'm not afraid of trans people. I guess he's friends with Posey Parker. Look, right, we can either have conversations, and maybe from this conversation, Connor will go, well, actually, I'm thinking a bit differently about this, and maybe I'll come from this conversation going, well, I'm thinking a bit differently about my position, and we might both learn something. Or I could sit here and say, well, you're a transphobe.
Yeah, and we can retreat to our tribes. And literally the people who are being hurt in the middle by insufficient provision of care, they get nothing out of it if we just retreat to our tribes.
If we just start screaming at each other. No. And I really think it's important, because there's too much of that that's going on, and you're not going to get there needs to be a solution to this, Connor, whether we like it or not, whether you like it or not, when it comes to what is true and not. The people who have different gender identities, sex changes, for want of a better phrase, which I know you don't believe exists, but want of a better phrase, there has to be something that gives them rights that they deserve to be able to do that, and women and other people the rights they deserve. There has to be some sort of compromise. We can't keep having this debate where we all scream at each other. We can't. Something's got to happen where both sides say, right, well, this is about as best as we're going to get it. We ain't going to get that by everyone calling each other horrible names. Morning, Romy, though. Nice to have you on board as well. Loving your common sense, Connor. So thank you for that. Really good point here from Scully regarding Manchester, saying it's the little people on the floor, the ambulance staff, the police, the fire crews who'll get blamed, but the orders came from above when it came to Manchester Arena, and they'll find a few scapegoats. Well, that's why, Scully, we've been really... it's been really important to us today to say that these orders came from above, that they didn't... that the people who were the paramedics and the firefighters, they were all chomping at the bit to get in there. They all wanted to help people. I mean, apparently it was absolutely heartbreaking the way in which people who were injured and the people helping them could hear the paramedic and the ambulances pulling up outside, and still no one was coming in. There were people screaming, apparently, saying, where the hell, where the hell are the ambulances, because no one was walking in. It is the most horrific indictment of the insanity where we are in this country at the moment, worrying about risk assessments when people are dying.
We're both wearing poppies at the moment, and it puts me in mind of the exact kind of ivory tower elitist attitude that sent lots of men to the front lines of the Somme just to get a few inches of trench territory. It's because if you're miles from the front where people are actually suffering, you make all sorts of incompetent decisions, and you have the attitude of the banality of evil of going, oh, it's just a few lives, it's unacceptable.
Yeah. Morning,
Good
David.
morning.
So we're talking. I don't know if you caught that. So we're talking about the report into the Manchester Arena bombing this week, and the fact that, I mean, you might have covered it on breakfast.
We covered it on breakfast, yeah.
The fact that the police they convened, the ambulance, the fire service convened 3 miles away because they were worried about repercussions and that it continuing. The ambulances arrived and didn't go in, and at this point people were dying inside.
I know, there were also ambulances leaving that venue and ambulances crossing over. There was just a lack of chain of command and sort of the silo nature of the services, and clearly it hadn't been. I mean, this is meant to be worked through, remember. We have national disaster plans, and that's the thing I don't really understand.
One of them wasn't announced. The one in Manchester for a big thing like that was called Operation Plato.
Indeed.
And they announced it to one set of emergency responders, but they didn't tell all the rest of them.
Exactly.
Things like that.
And in those situations, and I used to sort of be part of an exercise, but it's really important you have clear chains of command. You know exactly where it's coming from, and you know how those services work together. And of course, it only takes one of those people to make the wrong decision. And I think, and clearly in that report, it said that one of the people in charge was clearly out of his depth and couldn't actually make those critical decisions. And of course, when you've got, and they didn't clear the safe area, did they? That was the whole issue.
And they didn't zone it.
So they didn't zone it. So what you need is a clean, safe zone. So then you can put casualties in there. You can deal with those casualties. So, for example, that poor man who was bleeding to death, there was a passerby who happened to put a belt round as a tourniquet. Now, clearly what you need, and we have something called the golden hour in medicine, you've got to get in, and you've got to get in quickly.
And Safi Roussos, the poor 8-year-old who was alive.
I know.
And it's just horrific.
And did you see that terrible thing? She turned to them and she said, am I going to die?
At age 8, and at that point you'd scoop her up and you'd get her to hospital as quickly as you possibly could.
Of course you would.
And what was so awful, this just bizarre fact of... And look, there is one thing that you'd say, and there was talk at the time that there was an active shooter, and that would have caused some delay.
Of
and
course.
I think that's fair to say that. But the idea that the ambulances were heading towards the scene and not going in, fire engines were heading away from the scene because they were trying to convene 3 miles away.
But we also saw paramedics actually breaking ranks and going in. I think initially in that initial...
Well, if you would do that, would you?
Yeah,
would you
I probably would. I mean, if I felt that actually the medical need was such that that the chain of command was wrong, I think we would have broken ranks.
It's like...
But, I mean, it's so difficult in the heat of the moment.
There was that school shooting in Texas recently, wasn't there? And you saw the police on the school cameras were basically milling about in the corridor, holding their phones. Meanwhile, outside, parents were being restrained from going into the active situation to rescue their children, and more children died than they needed to.
But you see, I think this is all about being risk-averse, and the whole point...
I agree.
And that's the problem. And so, actually, what these children and parents and families needed is people in there with professionalism who know what they're doing. And, of course, what you should be doing is going in, establishing those safe zones, making sure you give immediate first aid and getting them out.
It's the contract between people and the state that was broken that day. That's exactly what that is, because that's exactly what you expect the state to do, and that is keep you safe. In those situations.
But you know those venues don't, and there's no legal obligation for them to actually have, I think, some sort of safety plan, security plan, emergency plan like that, and there needs to be.
But then what they'll do in those sorts of venues, I know we've got to talk about what's coming up on your show, but literally, but then you'll say, oh, I want to go to the toilet, and they'll say, oh no, you need to go round the one-way system because of crowd control.
Well, or COVID, you need to have your passport.
Think, well, hang on.
Yeah.
I can't walk through that one bit because it's one way, but a terror bomb goes off and you can't look after
It's all about priority.
Okay, very quickly.
So breakfast, I've been looking at a number of stories this morning. Obviously, there's this whole pensions thing, stealth tax, which is coming in. I mean, I do wonder if the Tory party is actually Tory anymore. And obviously, the pensioners are very much their core base, so they're alienating them. So if they want any votes, I think they've lost all of those.
Putting capital gains tax on selling your house, your private house.
I saw that. But you see, it goes to something else I really feel is iniquitous, which is inheritance tax. But actually, we're going to focus on the asylum problem. I mean, this is totally out of control. I think it's a national disgrace. We've got 120,000 people now in the backlog. No one's being processed. Right. What are we doing?
Okay, you and Rennie. Thank you, Connor. I'm back tomorrow morning from 5 a.m. This is Talk TV.